Well, when we decide the next leader of our nation, there are only 3 people who are on the ballot in all 50 states. I don't even know who the other 2 are. But I know that one of them is Gary Johnson, the Libertarian candidate for president. And he joins us here at Cairo FM, joins us in the studio. Gary, really a pleasure to have you in here.
Dory, great to be here with you. Always good to come to Seattle.
Yeah?
Yeah.
This hotbed of libertarianism?
Well, the water, and actually I came here for a couple of weeks to paraglide at Tiger Mountain.
Nice.
Several years ago.
You know, I was feeling guilty because I got an email from a listener earlier, and they said they were watching on the webcam, and they said, you've got a presidential candidate coming in, and you're wearing shorts and a polo shirt. I'd like to point out you and I are wearing the exact same dry-fit shirt today, so I don't feel so guilty.
Don't feel guilty.
No, okay. No. All right. I'm the kind of guy you've got to get.
Yeah.
Okay. I voted for Al Gore in 2000, for George W. Bush in 2004, and for Bob Barr in 2008. That's the trajectory of my last 3 presidential votes. Why should I vote for Gary Johnson in 2012?
I'm going to guess that you have 3 things that you're really concerned with. One is civil liberties, one is ending the wars, and the other is spending and the economy. That's what I'm going to guess. And I think libertarians perhaps embrace the best of both. The notion, and I'm speaking with a broad brush stroke, the notion that for the most part, people are socially accepting and fiscally responsible. And I think that's the broad brushstroke that describes libertarians. I think that I really do a lot better than Obama when it comes to civil liberties. I think I crush Obama when it comes to dollars and cents. I think I crush Romney when it comes to civil liberties, and I think I do a lot better than Romney when it comes to dollars and cents. I saw a statistic the other day that of the $16 trillion in debt that we have, $7.5 trillion of it is are Republicans that are responsible for. Mm-hmm. Republicans are responsible for, and that $8.5 trillion Democrats are responsible for. So, and we have a growing police state, and our conflicts seem to be never ending. I'm the only candidate that doesn't want to bomb Iran. I'm the only candidate that wants to get out of Afghanistan tomorrow, bring the troops home. I'm the only candidate talking about marriage equality from the standpoint of it being a constitutionally guaranteed right on par with civil rights of the 60s. I want to bring an end to the drug war. I would repeal the Patriot Act. I would have never signed the National Defense Authorization Act allowing you and I to be arrested and detained without being charged. Okay,
let's break down some of these things, because to me there is one overriding issue above all others, and that's the $16 trillion in debt that our nation faces. I think that is the greatest threat ever to our nation. And I really mean that. I think that's a greater threat than Al-Qaeda. I think it's a greater threat than the Nazis 70 years ago. I think that this could undo our nation more effectively than any other threat we've faced.
I completely agree. The biggest threat to our national security is the fact that we have as much debt as we have. I'm making a couple of promises. One is I promise to submit a balanced budget to Congress in the year 2013. Now, that's not promising a balanced budget. That's promising to submit a balanced budget. I'm also promising to veto any legislation where expenses exceed revenue, believing that if those 2 promises are kept, spending will be lower than any other scenario than you could possibly come up with. And then lastly, I promise to advocate on the part of throwing out the entire federal tax system. No more income tax, no more corporate tax. Abolish the IRS and replace it with a national consumption tax. In this case, I'm embracing the fair tax, which I really think is the answer when it comes to our exports, making our exports 23% more competitive. It's really the answer when it comes to jobs, because in a zero corporate tax rate environment, if the private sector doesn't create tens of millions of jobs, I don't know what it takes to create tens of millions of jobs. I see manufacturing jobs flocking back to the United States with a zero corporate tax rate environment.
I love the fair tax. And it always intrigues me that we have politicians who say, we want to cut cigarette smoking, so we're going to raise the cigarette tax. We want to cut drinking, so we're going to raise the sin tax on alcohol. And then they don't understand that when you raise the income tax, it actually provides a disincentive to people to earn money.
The notion that when you tax something, you get less of it. Yeah. And that's exactly what we've been doing.
Okay. All right.
So, and I also think the fair tax issues pink slips to half of Washington lobbyists. I think the fair tax really really boots crony capitalism in the rear end. Also,
if there's no IRS,
there's no more loopholes up for sale.
Yeah, and no industry to manipulate government. Okay, I had Ron Paul in the studio with me a few years ago, and I asked him a question: how much smaller could the federal government be on a percentage basis if you were president of the United States? We're talking with Gary Johnson, Libertarian candidate for president. If you were president, and if you had the power to unilaterally decide the size of the federal government, what percent of what we have now would the federal government be?
Well, this is in keeping with my promise to submit a balanced budget to Congress in the year 2013. We need to start by balancing the federal budget. So that is a 43% reduction in federal spending. That's a $1.4 trillion reduction. And, if you're going to talk about $1.4 trillion, you need to start off by talking about military spending, Medicaid, and Medicare. Let's start off with the big three. But if we don't fix this, I suggest we're all going to go down together. This is a sinking ship, and unless we all engage in mutual sacrifice, we're going to find ourselves without a country. We're going to find ourselves, in my opinion, in the midst of a monetary collapse where the dollars that we have don't buy a thing, because of the accompanying inflation that goes along with borrowing and printing money to the tune of 43 cents out of every dollar we spend. Okay,
let's talk about foreign policy. You would end the wars in both Afghanistan and Iraq immediately?
Immediately, and let's talk about a 43% reduction really quickly in the military. That would be getting out of the conflicts that we're engaged in. Let's end our military interventions. Let's reduce our military footprint on the planet by 43%. So I'm talking about bases. I'm talking about military that are stationed in Europe, Korea, Japan, reducing that footprint, reducing nuclear warheads from 2,300 to 500.
Okay. How realistic is that? Because I think Barack Obama would have loved to have appealed to the far left of his base by doing that, but he got in the office. And I think that he became convinced that there are good reasons why the United States has to take on terrorists on their own turf.
Or is it the military-industrial complex that says that there are jobs at stake, and if you cut the military by this amount, you're going to be faced with this massive unemployment? I don't buy off on the massive unemployment. By the way, just a trivia question, Dory. What year do we go back to spending levels if we reduce the military today by 43%?
No idea.
Just a shot in the dark?
I would guess we're going back only 5 years or so.
Yeah, 2003. So not the end. Not the end of the world.
Okay.
And what is the biggest threat to our national security? I would suggest that it is the fact that we are in debt to this point.
Okay, and would you subscribe to kind of the classic libertarian principle that we would never engage an enemy unless they threaten our homeland?
Yes, and so what's the checkoff on that? Well, that's congressional approval to actually go in and militarily intervene.
And the moral problem with that to a lot of people is they ask, would you have gotten involved if you were president of the United States 70 years ago? Would you have gotten involved in the European theater of World War II when there was evidence that Hitler was
I believe that I would have. Yes.
Well,
yes.
But how do you do that and stay true to that principle that I'll only get involved if our homeland is threatened?
Well, we do not. None of us want to sit by and watch a genocide go down. I just, though, will suggest in my own lifetime that the military has not gotten involved in any conflict that has resulted in the way that it was intended to turn out, that there's been an unintended consequence. I'm in the camp that believes we've made enemies of hundreds of millions of people on this planet that, but for our military interventions, would not be enemies of the United States.
But then you're just talking about a matter of degree, though, because we got involved under Bill Clinton in Bosnia because of a genocide. The eventual justification in Iraq was that Saddam was killing his people after there were no WMDs. So you could justify almost any war on that basis, and yet you've said you would only get involved if our homeland's threatened.
Well, no, I have said I do not want to. First of all, I think one of the biggest responsibilities of the President of the United States is to defend against those that would attack us. But that really ends up to be the operative word here. I mean, Let's just take Libya, for example. We get involved in Libya. We displace Gaddafi's personal army. They go off to Mali. They topple the government of Mali, a democracy. Well, we're down one democracy when it comes to Libya, and this was ostensibly to prevent genocide. And why do I know that a new authoritarian dictatorship is going to take over from the old authoritarian dictatorship? Which one's going to be better?
We're talking with Gary Johnson. He's the Libertarian Party candidate for president. Let me take a quick break here, and when we come back, we'll talk to him about the social issues, the war on drugs, all of that straight ahead as the Dory Monson Show rolls on. Libertarian Party candidate for president, Gary Johnson, in the studio with me. In 2008, 2008 was when, right before the election, both McCain and Obama signed on to the multi-trillion-dollar bailout. And that's when I said, no way could I ever vote for either one of these guys. And I voted for Bob Barr, knowing that I was pretty much throwing away my vote. Here in Washington, we all know Barack Obama is going to carry Washington in November no matter what. No matter how much you appeal to all of my listeners, Gary, Obama's going to carry Washington. Is this an exercise in futility? I mean, is it frustrating when you know that you don't have a legitimate shot?
Well, I believe I do have a legitimate shot. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think that was the case. Now, the only way that happens for me, Dory, is if I'm in the national debates against Obama and Romney, and the only way I get there is to poll at 15%, which isn't such a big stretch if I'm included in the polls. So I'm really heartened by what's happening here. I think I am lending voice to the fastest growing segment of American politics today. That would be for those that would label themselves libertarian, whether it's Democrat/libertarian, Republican/libertarian, just plain libertarian, or I have libertarian leanings. But historically, those people that call themselves libertarian when it comes to voting, they don't vote that way. I'm asking everybody that's ever described themselves as a libertarian to vote for me just this one time and see if it doesn't make a difference.
Okay, well, I mean, I certainly... as of right now, you have my vote. I mean, you truly do, because your principles make the most sense to me. Okay, the war on drugs. Would you legalize all drugs?
I'm just advocating the legalization of marijuana. I think we're at a tipping point when it comes to marijuana. Control it, regulate it, tax it. It's on the ballot in Colorado this November to regulate marijuana like alcohol.
It's going to be on the ballot here in Washington.
And as a matter of fact, it is. But I think that when we do that as a nation, we take giant steps toward rational drug policy, which starts with looking at drugs as a health issue rather than a criminal justice issue.
If the issue, though, I mean, libertarianism is you can do anything you want as long as you're not adversely affecting someone else. Why not let people snort cocaine and shoot up heroin and all of that? If they want to destroy themselves, what business is that of anyone?
If we legalized all drugs tomorrow, the world would be a better place. We would have less death, disease, crime, corruption. 90% of the drug problem is prohibition-related, not use-related. That's not to discount the problems with use and abuse. I think as a nation, when we legalize marijuana and we realize the sky isn't falling, and tomorrow we recognize that, holy cow, police are actually going out and enforcing real crime. The court's dockets are freed up, and we start letting people out of prison or not incarcerating as many people as we are, which, by the way, we have the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world, 2.3 million people behind bars. We legalize marijuana. We recognize the benefits from that, which will be immediate. Then we embark on down the road of back to rational drug policy. We have a couple of examples here. Portugal decriminalized all drug use 10 years ago in response to a heroin epidemic. Today, documented a 50% reduction in heroin use because they decriminalized it. Dory, that just flies in the face of what you think would have happened, but that's what happened. And by the way, Portugal and Holland, which has effectively decriminalized all drug use, both those countries have 60% the drug use as that of the United States. That's on a per capita basis, but that's marijuana, that's hard drugs, that's kids, and that's adults.
Okay. All right. We got 30 seconds. What's the biggest misconception about libertarians?
Oh, the biggest misconception is that, what would the misconception be? I don't know if people really do.
Yeah. That you hate government and that you're heartless, and that I just believe philanthropy should come from within and not mandated by governments. They can take 80% off the top before they spend 20% to help people.
Well, so I'm in the camp that believes that perhaps there are those that are really, truly in need, and perhaps government is the only way to do. Perhaps government ends up to be the only entity able to deliver on that. But I just think we should do this in the context of not spending more money than what we're taking in. You can't borrow to be benevolent, if you will. You can't borrow to give somebody groceries. It's just not sustainable, and what we're doing is absolutely unsustainable. Government has a role to protect us against individuals, groups, corporations that would do us harm.
All right, you got my vote?
Well, I'm going to try and keep working on it. I don't want to lose that.
All right, I'll be an advocate for you too. I'll keep spreading the gospel here. Gary Johnson, candidate for president. Pleasure. Thanks for coming in this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Story.